Hey friends, welcome back to Interesting Chinese Culture. From pre-Qin marketplaces to late Qing newspapers, how did advertising in China slowly take shape? Advertising is really not new at all. These days we are so surrounded by ads that we are almost numb to them. You unlock your phone and the first thing you see is a notification. You open a web page and a pop-up jumps right into the middle of the screen. You scroll through short videos and suddenly one cuts in with, "Friends, you have to buy this." Even when you just want to sit quietly and listen to some music, before the intro is even over, you can get hit with ads for shampoo, insurance, and during election season, even 90-second campaign ads. Basically, whatever ads a website wants to throw at you, it just keeps cycling them in front of you. So it is very easy to feel that all of this belongs to the modern commercial world, as if advertising could only exist after factories, assembly lines, neon city lights, television, and the internet came along. But if you really turn the clock back, you start to realize that people in ancient times also lived inside advertising. And not only did ancient advertising exist, it was layered. It was not just the clumsy kind of shouting, "Come buy something, come buy something." It could change depending on the setting, the trade, the distance, and the kind of customer. When you were still far away from a shop, it might catch your eye first with a flag or a lantern. When you got closer, it would pull you in with a shout or a chant. And once you actually stopped, the shop sign, the display at the entrance, and the goods laid out in front would all work together to nudge you inside. In more advanced cases, it did not even need you to buy something right away. It just needed you to remember it, so that when you actually needed something later, the name would pop back into your mind on its own. It is a little like the way some insurance company runs a viral ad campaign on a video platform, repeating its name so many times that the message gets forced into your brain. In truth, most people are not completely against advertising. What they really hate are the ads that ramble on forever, or the ones that seem to assume the audience is stupid. Some ads feel like they exist only for the sake of being ads. Everyone has probably seen this kind before. The screen is full of sunny outdoor activities and happy family smiles, but the product being sold is something you are supposed to ask your doctor about before using, and then the company tacks on a whole string of so-called disclaimers, warning that you might have an allergic reaction or that your mood could suddenly get worse. Personally, I really hate ads like that. To me, what they are really saying is this: be a test subject for our new product. You might end up feeling terrible, but we still want the money in your pocket. It sounds ridiculous. They could almost just rob you directly, but instead they hand you a product that may not even help much, as if that somehow makes it better. And if you think about it, once television entered every household, and later the internet spread everywhere, ads changed from something you could choose to watch or ignore into those 30 seconds you are forced to sit through. It is basically a compulsory drain on people's time. In ancient times, it might actually have been easier. If an ad did not suit you, you could just walk away from it or ignore it. But now, if you do not sit through the ad, you often do not even get to the actual content. To put it simply, the core of ancient advertising and modern advertising is really the same. First, the ad has to be seen. Then, the product has to be remembered. And finally, when you need it, you will almost automatically search for that product. And that is when it gets you to willingly spend your money.
So, in today's episode, we are going back along a very long historical timeline. We are starting with the earliest markets in China, then moving into the cities of the Han and Tang dynasties, walking into the night markets of the Song dynasty, and then passing through the streets, shops, and businesses of the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties to see how ancient people slowly turned the act of selling things into a mature system of communication. Following our usual habit, we will begin with the earliest period in history. If we really want to trace the earliest form of advertising in China, then we have to go back to the pre-Qin period. Of course, this was still far away from what we would call full-brand advertising today, and there were not yet those later commercial streets lined with shops and signs everywhere. But the most basic form of promoting yourself was already there. The most typical commercial space in the pre-Qin period was called the shi. A shi was a centralized trading place. In English, it would basically be what we call a market, and that also connects to the Chinese cultural idea of the morning market and the night market that we still see today. In this kind of market, people brought their goods in. The market opened at a fixed time and then closed at a fixed time. In that sense, it was actually very similar to the morning markets and night markets we know now. So what was the most basic form of advertising at that time?
It was simply this: put it out where people can see it. If you sold fish, you put the fish in the most visible place right in front. If you sold cloth, you hung up the bolt with the best color. If you sold pottery, you placed the most complete and best made piece out in front. In a society with very low literacy, the most effective way to communicate was never to explain for a long time. It was to let people understand at a glance what you were selling. And we know that the unification of written characters and units of measurement happened in the Qin dynasty, so once those things were standardized, doing business naturally became easier. That logic has not changed even today. Why does a barbecue stall at a night market arrange its skewers so full, so bright, and so glossy? And why is there always a very eye-catching photo with the biggest words showing exactly what is being sold? It is like those food trucks at some fairs in the United States that sell lemonade and popcorn. Their signs always show brightly colored food or pictures that look nothing like the real food at all. But the moment people see them in a crowd, they immediately know what is being sold there. That is advertising. You may not even smell the food yet, but your eyes have already caught it. In the same way, in the pre-Qin marketplace, the goods themselves were the earliest billboards, and after putting things on display, the second step was shouting them out. There must have been street selling in the pre-Qin period, even though it had not yet developed into the later kind of highly rhythmic chanting that almost sounded like singing. Yes, something as ordinary as hawking your goods slowly evolved along with history into a very distinctive kind of alleyway culture. In some places, special local styles of calling out to customers later even became cultural symbols with strong regional character. After all, in a busy marketplace, if you simply stand there and say nothing, why would anyone have to look at your goods? You have to make some sound. The louder your voice is, the more it can cut through the crowd. Whoever can get someone to stop for just a moment has a slightly better chance of making a sale. So even though pre-Qin advertising was still very primitive, its basic logic was already complete. Put it out so people can see it, and call it out so people can hear it. When you look at it that way, the advertising in our markets today does not seem all that different from what existed in the pre-Qin period. History and the generations may have moved forward, but in this part of promotion, the method does not seem to have changed very much. Next, we move on to the Qin and Han dynasties. The Qin dynasty was very short, but it did something extremely important. It unified things. It unified the writing system, units of measurement, roads, and the administrative system. That may sound like it has nothing to do with advertising, but in fact it matters a great deal. Once markets began to connect across a much larger area, goods were no longer just circulating locally in small circles. They were entering a much wider network of exchange, and once the market became bigger, there were more strangers. The more strangers there were, the more important advertising naturally became. On top of that, the Qin dynasty also carried out large-scale road construction. Even though the original goal was better central control, the building of roads and the standardization of wheel tracks also helped commercial exchange between different regions. Merchants could travel farther, goods could move faster, and business naturally benefited from it. By the Han dynasty, this became even more obvious. Cities were expanding, shops were increasing, and trades were becoming more stable. At this point, advertising was no longer just about shouting once from a market stall. It started to become more about how to arrange the front of a shop so that people could tell at a glance what kind of business it was. So one very clear change in Han Dynasty advertising was that identifying objects at the front of shops became more important. It was a little like the logos we see on products today. If a shop sold wine, there would be objects, decorations, or signs at the front connected to wine. If it sold medicine, it might place out a mortar, medicine jars, or gourds that clearly suggested healing and medicine. If it sold cloth, it would hang out fabric samples. If it sold metal tools, it would place the brightest and most polished axes and knives right at the front. What is interesting about advertising at this stage is that it was not yet especially good at creating desire, but it was already very good at showing identity. In other words, the first problem Han Dynasty advertising was trying to solve was, first, you need to know what I am selling. Do not underestimate that step. It was actually very important. From that point on, advertising began to shift from the presence of the goods to the presence of the shop. There was another very interesting change at this time as well. Merchants started paying attention to location. Places near city gates, near major roads, near ferry crossings, or near the center of the market naturally became more desirable. The easier a position was to see, the more important it became to make the storefront stand out. This way of thinking feels very modern. Today, people talk about prime retail locations. Ancient people understood that too. Then we move on to the Wei, Jin, and Northern and Southern dynasties. Even though our current main story has not reached that historical timeline yet, if we look at the experience of different dynasties across history, we already know this must have been a turbulent period.
Looking back at the periods we have already talked about, the Zhou dynasty was divided into Western Zhou and Eastern Zhou, and Eastern Zhou was then divided into the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. Back then, the feudal states fought constantly and everything was in chaos. The Three Kingdoms period, which is where our current main story is heading, also came after Eastern Han and Western Han, and even from the story itself, you can hear that it was an age of constant war and a divided realm, still a time of disorder. So this Northern and Southern dynasties period, from 420 to 589, was also an age of war and instability. Many people may think there is not much to say about advertising in a chaotic age, but in fact, in exactly that kind of era, commercial communication grew in some very special ways. Because the more unstable society became, the more people were on the move, merchants were on the road, armies were on the road, and refugees were on the road. As long as people were moving, the shops, wine houses, medicine sellers, and carriage repairers along the roads all had to learn how to speak to strangers. So one especially obvious feature of advertising in this period was that it could easily spread by word of mouth, and that meant shop advertising had to be easier to remember, or at least clear enough that people passing by could catch it in a very short time. It is a little like the ads that suddenly appear when we scroll through videos today. They have to leave the strongest possible impression in the shortest possible time. It was not like the later great cities, where shops put a lot of thought into layer upon layer of persuasion in busy night markets. It was more direct. That is because it was aimed at travelers. A traveler would not stop and carefully study how many words were written on a shop sign, and would not patiently listen to a long explanation. He just wanted to know whether he could stay here, whether there was wine and food, whether he could repair a carriage, or whether he could buy medicine. So advertising in this period especially valued being understood at a glance. At this stage, there was also another kind of space that advertising especially liked to attach itself to, and that was the area around temples and the early forms of temple fairs. In ancient times, especially during unstable dynasties, one of the things ordinary people did most often was pray to gods and Buddhas and hope for protection. So naturally, on the roads leading to temples, vendors and stalls began to gather, selling incense and candles, offerings, food, and all kinds of travel supplies. Advertising was still not as mature as it would become later, but at this point, the idea that ads needed to be placed in spaces where crowds gathered naturally was already beginning to take shape. Then we come to the period when advertising truly became lively, and that would be the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty, which is often praised in Chinese history as a golden age, was not only a time of cultural richness and wide commercial exchange between many powers, but also a period when merchants became a very important group in society. But the Tang had a very special feature. Even though merchants were not given especially high status in terms of social values, commerce in reality was extremely prosperous. Great cities like Chang'an, Luoyang, and Yangzhou had thriving markets. Goods moved quickly between north and south, and the Silk Road brought in large numbers of foreign merchants as well. Industries such as wine houses, inns, spices, medicine, silk, and jewelry were all very active, so the actual influence and visibility of merchants in society. Compared with the earlier dynasties, the biggest thing about advertising in the Tang Dynasty was this: it started to feel urban. Chang'an and Luoyang in the Tang Dynasty were not ordinary cities. They were super cities. There were more people, more trades, and a much more complicated mix of people coming and going. Foreign merchants, envoys, travelers, monks, and officials were all mixed together. Once a city grows to that scale, advertising can no longer stay simple. It has to become more layered. So Tang advertising clearly started to pay more attention to the storefront. That word really matters. In Chinese commercial culture, the storefront is not just decoration.
It is part of the advertising itself. Whether your entrance is eye-catching enough, whether your lanterns are bright enough, whether your sign looks impressive enough, whether the place feels inviting when people look inside, all of that directly affects whether someone wants to walk in. It is a little like window displays today. Tang wine houses and inns understood this especially well. Wine houses in particular. Wine is almost perfect for atmosphere-based advertising because what it sells is not just the drink itself. It sells noise, company, social energy, and that feeling of come in and sit for a while. So by the Tang dynasty, wine flags had already become very important. Once a flag was hung up and the wind caught it, the whole street knew there was a shop ahead. Tang advertising also had another very interesting feature. It began to make use of an exotic feeling. Chang'an in that era was very open. Foreign goods, spices, music and dance, and clothing from outside all carried a strong sense of freshness. Smart merchants, of course, knew how to use that. Today, many brands like to sell an exotic flavor or an overseas experience. People in the Tang dynasty were basically doing the same thing. Because the essence of advertising is simple, give people a reason to feel that this shop is different from the others. But even though the Tang dynasty was already very prosperous, the period when ancient Chinese advertising truly exploded was still the Song dynasty. That is almost beyond debate. There was something especially remarkable about Song commercial society. It was not only good at doing business, it was good at making business look good. If Tang advertising already felt urban, then Song advertising felt like the entire street was communicating all at once. In other words, it was already the early form of the modern commercial street. In Kaifeng, or Linan, in the Song dynasty, once evening came and the lights were turned on, another layer of the commercial world was only just beginning. The night markets came alive, the tea houses grew noisy, and the wine houses filled with human voices. At that point, advertising was no longer just one shop hanging up a sign once in a while. It became the breathing rhythm of the whole street. What made Song advertising so impressive was that it already understood multi-layered reach. Standing at the entrance of a street, the first thing you saw was the flags and shop signs. That was the first layer. Walk forward 2 more steps, and then you heard the cries of the vendors. That was the second layer. Once it got darker, the lanterns, light signs, and box lamps all lit up, and those bright spots in the night drew you forward. That was the third layer. And once you got close enough, the goods displayed at the entrance, the lively scene inside, and the smells drifting out all worked together to pull you in. That was the final layer. At that point, this was no longer just simple selling. It was a whole path of design. Or you could say that the Song dynasty's full process was already a very early model of the modern shopping district. By the Song dynasty, things like shop signs and hanging shop markers were already very mature. People generally knew what kind of marker belonged to what kind of trade, and what kind of flag was used by what kind of shop. Wine houses were especially good at this, because they depended heavily on being recognized from far away. The moment you saw a wine flag lifted high in the distance, you almost did not even need to think. You already knew there was wine ahead. It was not just telling you this place sells wine. It was also hinting that there might be noise, lights, people, and a place where you could sit down. You could say that wine house advertising was always the boldest thing on the commercial street. Then again, if everyone was doing business, how could advertising possibly not be loud and dramatic? Well, there really was one industry that did the opposite. It was not loud at all, and it did not make a big show of itself. That was the pharmacy. A pharmacy did not need to be flashy. What it needed was a sense of reliability. So, the front of a pharmacy was usually steadier and more orderly, giving people the feeling that this was a proper place. In fact, this is very similar to today. Very few people would turn a pharmacy into something that looks like a nightclub full of colorful lights, because what it sells is not excitement, it sells reassurance. Then there were the street cries. Song vendors were no longer satisfied with something flat like selling pastries. They sang, they stretched the tones, they turned the product, the price, and the selling points into short, catchy lines. Why? Because the human brain naturally remembers rhythmic things more easily. You might not buy after hearing it once, but if you hear it 3 times, that tune starts to stick in your head. Then the next time you want to buy that thing, it pops up on its own. And from that, you can already see the early shape of the way viral advertising melodies spread.
Modern marketers may think this method is clever, but people in the Song dynasty had already worked out this kind of advertising model hundreds of years earlier. This really does feel a lot like the catchy short video tunes we hear today, and the Song dynasty already understood something very well. Sound comes before desire. Sometimes you do not suddenly want to buy something because you are hungry. It happens because you hear it first, smell it first, and get wrapped up in the atmosphere first, and only then do you think, maybe I should go buy some. It is like the way movie theaters always run ads for Coke, or the way Nike uses that line, "Just do it," or the way some companies keep repeating a single slogan again and again on video platforms. That kind of method plants the desire to buy into your subconscious first, so that when you later need a similar product, the name comes to mind naturally. Ancient people were already doing this kind of thing in their advertising. Taking one more step forward, we come to one of the most famous things in Song dynasty advertising history, which is printed advertising. In other words, something like the flyers we have now, or those huge billboards by the roadside and along the highway, or even the signature pattern of a luxury brand. It really is surprising. A lot of the marketing methods we think of as modern today were already things ancient people had played with long ago. At this point, I can already picture one of my friends rolling their eyes at me and saying, right, everything came from China. But really, this is only because China has such a long history, and these were conclusions people reached through trying things over a very long stretch of time. Some things are impossible to trace to one true origin anyway, and honestly, that is not the most important part. The most famous example is the bronze printing plate advertisement from Liu's needle shop in Jinan. A lot of people hear about it, and their first reaction is just, oh, so it was an early advertisement. But what makes it impressive is not simply that it was early. What makes it impressive is that it was already mature. It had the shop name, the type of product, a promise of quality, and even a white rabbit image as its symbol. That white rabbit was definitely not there just for decoration. It was the key to making people remember the shop. Not everyone could read, but everyone could recognize a picture. Once you saw the white rabbit again, you would know that this was that needle shop. That is already a very modern sense of branding. What is even more interesting is that this ad also taught people how to tell fake goods from the real thing. That is exactly the same logic as today, when brands run ads and at the same time remind people to buy only from official sources. Song dynasty merchants were already doing that. You could say that the Song dynasty was the high point of advertising in ancient China. By the Song dynasty, advertising was no longer just a small trick for attracting customers. It had already become a very mature system of urban communication. Next, we move on to the Yuan dynasty. Yuan advertising did not have the same dense, lively, flowing street atmosphere that Song advertising had, but it had a different flavor. It put more emphasis on being recognized on the road. The Yuan dynasty had a huge territory, long transportation routes, and many people moving across regions. In that kind of setting, one especially important job of advertising was to make sure that people from other places could understand it too. Under those circumstances, the core function of advertising came back to one word: clarity. So Yuan advertising was more practical. It did not care as much about sounding elegant or being indirect. Its first job was to make sure that people traveling past could understand it at a glance. It may not have looked as fancy as other periods, but it was actually very smart, because it served a mobile society rather than a fixed circle of regular customers. For example, a pharmacy that specialized in treating children would carve a wooden child as its sign. A medical shop that specialized in women's care before and after childbirth would paste up a large shoe made of bright red paper as its symbol. A veterinary medicine shop would place a very large wooden medicine bottle outside and paint a large horse at the entrance, so that people could tell at once that this was a place for treating animals and giving them medicine. Later studies that summarized the forms of ancient Chinese shop signs also pointed out that shops in Dadu during the Yuan dynasty already made heavy use of these model signs and symbolic signs. Shoe shops would hang large shoe models outside, and fan shops would hang models of fan leaves. These were all very typical practices. If Song advertising felt like a street that could speak, then Ming advertising felt more like a merchant who knew how to manage his own reputation. By the Ming dynasty, the most important word was no longer the shop sign or the hanging banner. It was the zihao, the established trade name. A zihao is probably something quite unique in Chinese culture. It is a kind of brand, but with much more weight behind it. A very common example is in Beijing. When people talk about Beijing roast duck, locals will often tell you that if you want the real thing, you should go to an old established name like Bian Yifang. In Chinese commercial culture, a zihao carries a lot of weight. In general, when a brand has a zihao, it is not just a store name. It stands for trust, history, inheritance, and rules. Merchants gradually realized that temporary excitement was not enough. What could really keep a business going for the long term was continuity, often a business passed down through a family. So by the Ming Dynasty, advertising started to place more and more emphasis on craftsmanship, family tradition, authenticity, and age. This is actually something very Chinese. If you go to a supermarket with a Chinese friend, they will often check the brand name or the company behind a product before buying it. That is because Chinese commercial culture has always cared a lot about whether something has a clear source behind it. A medicine shop might say that its formula has been passed down for generations. A silk shop might explain where its fabric comes from and how its craftsmanship works. A pastry shop might tell you that it has been around for many years. At this stage, advertising was no longer just trying to get people to walk in and take a look. It was trying to make people feel that this place was trustworthy. And that is also why China later ended up with so many old established brands. In China, a brand has never simply meant, "I used to be popular." It means, "My products have lasted, and after many years of selling, they have proven that they can be trusted." At this stage, advertising slowly started helping shops build that long-term image. Finally, we come to the Qing dynasty. In the early Qing, the traditional system of advertising was basically made even more complete. Shop signs, hanging banners, storefronts, zihao, lights, and reputation were all still there, and by then, they were already very well developed. But what makes the Qing dynasty especially interesting is the late Qing period. That is because the late Qing stood right between the ancient world and the modern one. On the one hand, traditional storefront advertising, street advertising, and spoken advertising were all still very much alive. On the other hand, advertising also began to take on a completely new form with the rise of the traditional media. Newspaper ads, posters, stone print ads, and calendar posters were all slowly beginning to appear. On the streets, old established brands were still hanging up their old signboards, banners were still swaying at the door, and wine houses were still drawing customers in with lights and noise. But at the same time, newspapers were already starting to carry large blocks of commercial copy, and medicines, foreign goods, and everyday products were being promoted in much more modern ways. Medicine ads were especially obvious. That is because medicine is especially suited to spreading across space. This is one of the most interesting transition periods in Chinese advertising. Traditional advertising had not yet left the stage, but modern advertising had already arrived. The hanging banners at the shop door and the ads in the newspapers were living in the same era at the same time. So let us briefly sort out the timeline of how ancient Chinese advertising developed. Advertising first appeared in the pre-Qin period, and its form was still the most basic kind of street stall display and shouting. By the Qin and Han dynasties, advertising had started to develop fixed shops and recognizable storefront markers. During the Wei, Jin, and Northern and Southern dynasties, advertising that could spread more widely was just beginning to take shape. It was road-based advertising, quick recognition in a mobile society. By the Tang dynasty, advertising had become tied to the urban storefront and to the special appeal of the foreign and exotic. The Song dynasty was the true explosion of ancient Chinese advertising. You could say that it gathered together all the earlier forms of advertising and then developed and preserved them even further. The Yuan dynasty began to place more emphasis on advertising that could be recognized across regions. The Ming dynasty was a period that cared much more about zihao, brand, and trust. And the late Qing was the point when traditional advertising and modern media advertising began to connect. Now, when we look back at today's video ads and pop-up ads, ancient advertising almost feels a little charming by comparison. It had wine flags moving in the wind, street vendors turning their calls into little songs, and lantern light making the night market glow like flowing water. That kind of highly interactive advertising really does seem much more interesting than modern marketing. All right, that is all for today. See you next time. If you enjoyed today's episode,
Feel free to give the show a like, subscribe, and share it with someone you think would enjoy it too. Thank you for spending this time with me. I will see you in the next episode.